Hi, I'm Talia, and welcome to another episode of Dose of Pharma. Today is an incredibly special and super relevant episode as well, especially for students applying to hospital or community internships in the near future or even this year. We are so lucky to be joined by Anum Poonawala, who is an amazing clinical pharmacist at Northern Hospital and an evaluation network member at the Therapeutic Guidelines, and she also happens to be my mentor. So today's episode is super exciting. We're going to be discussing how to optimize your resume, providing tips on cover letter writing, and even giving advice on how to nail an interview. To begin with, Anum, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we jump into all things job applications, would you be able to tell us a bit about yourself and your pharmacy journey?
Yes, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. It's my first ever podcast. Before I get into things about myself, I just want to say I know how fourth year students must be feeling with intern applications. Having gone through it myself, I'm just, again, so excited to share my experience and insights. So I really hope today's podcast can help your listeners. So about myself, you introduced me perfectly. So I completed my Bachelor's of Pharmacy at Monash and graduated in 2019. And then I went on to complete my internship at Northern Health in 2020, and I've been a clinical pharmacist there ever since. So during my time, I've had the chance to do several clinical rotations from psych, women's and children's, rehab, aged care, and I've had the chance to mentor interns, supervise students, and be involved in research as well. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Amazing. Thanks, Anum. It sounds like a really remarkable journey thus far, and it's really great that you've been able to experience so many rotations as well. So we'll now shift the focus onto our job application questions. So let's start off by discussing, I guess, resume writing. What are some things that you'd recommend including on your resume for a hospital or even a community internship?
Yeah, so first of all, with your CV, I think making sure, regardless whatever positions for hospital, community, industry, making sure you've got the basics there. So that's of course, your personal details, your professional summary. This is really important because it highlights how you're unique and what your interests are and your particular experience. Just like 3 or 4 lines, making sure you've got your education, your employment history, even volunteering and community involvement, especially if it's relevant to the job that you're applying to, and your references, of course. So for a hospital role specifically, I wouldn't say anything you must include, but rather if you have this experience, then it would make your application more appealing to the hospitals that are interviewing you. Firstly, any placements that you've done, any experience you have in hospital. So your uni placements, definitely. Any SHPA summer placements, these are great because for the SHPA summer placements, as you know, you apply for it yourself. It's like a job application. So it shows your interest in hospital pharmacy, and it shows that you take initiative, which is great because sometimes it can be hard to show passion and interest through writing, through your cover letter and CV. So that's great to include if you've done those. Also including if you have any current jobs at a hospital already. I know that not everyone might have that, but if you do, make sure it's highlighted and make sure you really focus on how the skills you have from that current role at that hospital. And the next thing I would say is if you haven't done a summer placement, or if you don't have a job at a hospital pharmacy, it's okay. But you can also have a professional development section in your CV. It's not necessary to have it. I remember in my CV, I made sure to check my old intern CVs before this podcast started, but I included that in my CV. So I just had a professional development subheading, and I included anything like courses that I've done or certifications, any seminars or workshops that are relevant to hospital pharmacy. So, like SHPA has like workshops. If you've done, for example, any cultural competency certifications, that's applicable to hospital and community, or any job really. there's also rural practice certifications if you're applying somewhere regional. So including that as well. Really anything that shows that you've got an interest in hospital pharmacy or community pharmacy and any experience relevant to that role.
Yeah, that was a very, very good summary. And I think personally, I'm definitely going to take a lot of that advice on board. Even with the professional development, it's something that I hadn't really thought of even including before. So it's a very, I think, unique thing to have if we have experience in that for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't even realize that you have that. Like I know through uni, you do like the mental health first aid course. Like even that is good to include because that's relevant in a health setting, any health setting. So yeah, definitely good to include.
Amazing. Yeah, I think definitely going to consider putting that on for sure. And I guess we've kind of already discussed this, but so what are some things that'll make your resume stand out as a pharmacy student? So you've kind of highlighted like SHPA, any summer placements or like any other placements that you've done. If you work in a hospital, did you have any other things to add to this one?
Yeah, so those things definitely, like I mentioned, include those. In terms of making your CV stand out, I guess it would be anything that's apart from your uni degree or something that you already do in uni. Another thing I can think of is research.
Okay.
So I know that at Monash, you've got like your inquiry unit. Make sure to include whatever research project you've done through that. If you've done any research projects during your SHPA placement, maybe if you had a regular uni placement and you were part of like an audit, including that. Really just anything that's apart from your standard uni degree that you do during your bachelor's. Achievements as well. If you received any awards during your degree, if your volunteering roles are great as well, anything in uni, or even if it's not related to pharmacy, often there are transferable skills. So mentioning that as well would be what I would include.
Yeah, great. And I guess that leads us really great into our next question as well, which is just about extracurriculars. So you talked about including things, I guess, other than pharmacy. What else have you maybe gotten yourself involved in, whether it's like volunteering? Do you believe that interviewers, like, I guess, care quite a bit about extracurriculars, or is that something that's kind of used to separate students, essentially?
Look, I guess that depends on the interviewer, and it would also depend on what the extracurricular is. And it also would depend on how you, I guess, highlight it in your CV.
Yeah.
Because you could list that you're like the ambassador of XYZ, but if you don't link it to how that role or that volunteering experience makes you a right fit for that hospital, then they might not care about it. So like really your whole CV and your cover letter is showing why you're a good fit for that hospital, why they should hire you. So I would say they do care about your extracurriculars and volunteering experience. So it's definitely worth mentioning, but just making sure that you link it to the role that you're applying for. And again, like I said, whether it's pharmacy related or not pharmacy related, there's always transferable skills. So it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, great. And I think a lot of students, me personally, I guess we were under the impression as well that like, we have to do all these extracurriculars because it's going to look really good on our CV. But then we've been told as well, like, oh, if it's not pharmacy specific, maybe don't include it. But it's really refreshing to hear that we should recognize that there are transferable skills, even if the extracurricular isn't fully pharmacy focused. So it's definitely worthwhile to include. So thank you for sharing that as well. So in terms of the resume, so resumes have a lot of different sections as you've listed previously. Is there a certain section that employers, whether it be like hospital or community pharmacists, that they'd really like pay most attention to when they're looking to hire an intern?
So I wouldn't say that there's one like specific section that they pay the most attention to. But firstly, when like any document, whether you're interviewer or not interviewer, if you're reading anything, the first thing that you look at is the layout.
Yes.
So firstly, making sure that your layout is done well.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is making sure that the grammar is correct, that everything flows, that there's not just chunks of text, that there's a good amount of white space relevant to the information that you have. Making sure everything that you've written there has a purpose and demonstrates, again, why you're a fit for that hospital. Like not just listing things, but actually explaining how that applies to that role. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's a particular section that they look at. it would be worth focusing more on your employment history.
Yeah.
And say if you haven't had much experience, maybe just really say like you've only had like the one community job, which is okay. You can yourself focus more on like your professional development section or your volunteering section. So yeah, I would say there's not one section they look at, but rather the resume as a whole.
Yeah, great. That's reassuring to hear as well that they kind of look at it as a whole picture. And the last question that we have for our resume section of this episode is, do employers care about grades, like putting your GPA or WAM? Is that something you'd recommend putting on your resume, or something you'd say maybe leave off?
Look, if you have a competitive GPA, by that I mean like at least high distinction and above, sure, you can include it. But I would say that it's not that they care or don't care, but rather it's like they're indifferent towards it.
Yeah.
Because say if you have an amazing GPA, say if you have a 4.0 GPA, they won't just look at that and be like, we need to hire this person. Obviously, there's so many other things that to look at. Are they a good communicator? Do they have the relevant skills? Have they have like relevant experience? So if you have a competitive GPA, no harm in including it. But if you don't want to include it, you don't have to. It's not a pivotal point of the CV. But what I would list under your bachelor's is making sure you list any awards that you have, because that shows that you're hardworking, diligent, any achievements that you have. Again, it's another thing that makes you stand out. So I would focus more on that. GPA, if you want to, sure, but you don't have to.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's definitely a good idea to list the awards instead, potentially like under the degree. So yeah, I think a lot of students will hopefully take on that advice, because it's a great way to show, as you said, hardworking and dedicated to studies, which is great. So now I'll be shifting the focus to the next part of the episode, which is cover letters, which is a lot of the time something that students dread writing, because where do you even start with a cover letter? So for our first question, how do we tailor our cover letter to hospital values, and how often do hospitals even look at what we've written about the values and even factor that into consideration?
Yeah, so firstly, I know cover letters can be so daunting. How do you write a full page of your passion and your skills and your interests? Is so daunting. But once you do your first one, just know that it does get easier, because you have the same experience, like you have the same skills. It's about tailoring it to each hospital. So in terms of the values, before I get into that, I think it's important to first think the values that this hospital has, what they stand for. Does that actually resonate with you? I know like during this time, I myself had a bit of, tunnel vision. I just want to get the intern position. I want to secure a hospital internship. But the thinking long term as well, do I actually want to contribute to the values of this hospital? Do I want to contribute to the mission that they have?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're interested, like I know you're really interested in sustainability.
Yes.
So say, for example, that's something that you want to continue on in your career, you want to contribute to. Does the hospital currently, does the pharmacy department do anything for that?
Yeah.
And if they do, that's something worth mentioning in your cover letter. So I'd say that's the first step. In terms of how to include it in your cover letter, I would say the way that I went about it was I thought about times where I've demonstrated that value.
Right.
So, which we do all the time. So, for example, like a lot of values are quite similar for most hospitals.
Yeah.
So, for example, like teamwork or togetherness, really you could just highlight, say, for example, in one paragraph of your cover letter, you want to talk about your community pharmacy role. You can mention like liaise with other technicians or pharmacists in the dispensary to dispense medications in a timely manner and work together. And then just linking that with the value of the hospital, like if it's togetherness or teamwork. So I would say giving examples of when you've actually demonstrated that value.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make, because I feel like a lot of the time we say stuff like, oh, my values align with that of the hospital, but we actually don't even give examples of how they align or how we've demonstrated that. So it's definitely a good idea to, really give a proper example to show them that, yes.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't have to do all of them, because, the cover letter still is just one page.
Yes.
You won't be able to link all of them, because, you want to have a good mix in your cover letter, like your job or like any community involvement or other skills that you have. Just really focusing on what you have actually demonstrated and highlighting that. I also want to mention with the values, they ask that in interviews as well. So just making sure you're extremely familiar with the values.
Sure.
I can almost guarantee that they will ask you about values. So make sure
great.
you're really familiar with that.
Perfect. Yeah. So for our viewers and listeners, pay attention to the values of the hospital that you're, or even community pharmacy that you want to intern at. So I think another thing that a lot of people struggle with is just finding a balance in the cover letter. So our next question, is it more important to kind of showcase your skills or discuss your passions in a cover letter? And how do you kind of strike that balance?
Yeah, that can be difficult. Firstly, both are important.
Yes.
And not only do you want to just show like your passion and skills in general for hospital pharmacy, but for that particular hospital. Why do you want to work at that particular hospital?
Mm-hmm.
I stress that because you don't want your cover letters seeming generic.
Yeah.
Again, which you can highlight by going specifically into the values that are just for that hospital. So yeah, both are very important to include. I think that the way that you can go about it is, firstly, what I did, passion and interest, you can highlight that a bit in your professional summary as well. Because that's usually the first thing that they read in your CV. So highlighting it there. Throughout your cover letter, it can be a bit difficult. The way I would do it is kind of not listing, but when you're explaining your skills, say, for example, I'm an excellent communicator and you've demonstrated this through, say, for example, if you have a role say, for example, you have a role at uni where you're like, say, like a past leader, or you have some leadership role where you communicate effectively. And then you can link that to your passion of you are really, for example, you find that really rewarding and you want to continue that in a hospital pharmacy setting. Or you could maybe, I guess, make it a bit more specific to your hospital setting. So, for example, if you link your community pharmacy role and just say, I don't know, you counsel a lot of patients from a cultural and linguistically different background, and you want to say if the hospital you're applying at, you know that they have a lot of diverse patients, linking that to, you have this practice skill and you want to contribute that to the pharmacy department because for that particular hospital, you know how they've got that population. So yeah, doing, I think, a lot of research on that hospital and then trying to link, it's a bit difficult, but trying to link your skills and your interests together.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I even like the idea about mentioning some of those passions at the start of the resume. If you were to do that, just a bit of a side question, how long should that be at that start of the resume, since it's the first thing they're going to read? Should it be like a couple of sentences, a paragraph?
Yeah, I feel like your professional summary is usually just 3 to 4 lines.
Okay.
Maybe just, it varies for each person, what the interest are and what the experience is. But if you can just say, for example, you're passionate about hospital pharmacy because XYZ, whatever it is, that's like just mentioning that you're passionate and interested. And like I said before, things like the fact that you've done, say, if someone's done an SHPA placement or any extracurriculars, that also demonstrates that you're passionate and interested in a hospital pharmacy. So yeah, the best way to mention it I would say in your CV is under when you explain your duties and skills.
Okay.
And then in your cover letter, when you demonstrate it again through your duties and skills, trying to link that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I guess another question that kind of why people are a bit scared of writing cover letters is that hospitals have so many cover letters that they read and they go through. There are so many applicants. So I know we've kind of talked about how to make your CV stand out, but any advice, or is there any different advice as to how to make your cover letter stand out?
Again, it's really just trying to showcase why you want to work at that particular hospital. It can be a bit difficult because you only have like that set number of experiences. So what I did in mine is I dedicated one paragraph to what I wanted the hospital to know about me.
Sure.
So one I did about how I was already working at Northern as a student. So I really used that paragraph to highlight how I've already been working there and the environment is great and I've had so much experience doing XYZ, and I want to continue doing that because I know what a great hospital they are, XYZ. So really just trying to tailor it to that hospital. I think another tip I could say is looking at the hospital's strategic plan. So normally they have like they publish like a strategic plan which has like their values, their mission, their goals, etc.
Yeah.
So looking at that can give you a good idea about how to tailor your cover letter.
Yeah, great.
What else can I think of? Yeah, that would be the main thing. And if you have also highlighting any specific specific experiences that you have, so say you've got like your community job or you're already working at the hospital, making sure that's at the beginning, and then anything else that you've got. So say, for example, if, like I said, if you've done an SHA placement or any volunteering roles, because not everyone will have those extra roles. If you can highlight that, then that will make your cover letter stand out too.
Great. Yeah, I never even thought to look at the strategic plan. So that's definitely something that I might
I
head
think
on to
maybe I
look
was a bit
at.
extra, but
No, great advice. It's good to be extra because it'll help you stand out and understand the hospital a little bit better as well, which is great. So that was some great advice about resume and cover letters. And now for our final section, we're going to be talking about tips for interviews. So for our first question, how do you make yourself stand out in an interview, whether it be online or even in person? And as a side note as well, was your interview for your internship, was that in person or was that online?
Yeah. So firstly, my interview was all in person, like every hospital that I interviewed was all in person. I know that for Northern, back when I interviewed, there was like, I think there was like a speed round kind of thing, and then a group one, and then a one-on-one interview.
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't had experience with online interviews, but in terms of how to do well and how to stand out, firstly, the interviewers aren't just looking at the actual answer that you're giving. They're also, similar to your OSCEs, it's not just the answer that you give, but they're looking at how you communicate. When I say how you communicate, are you speaking clearly? Are you coherent? Are you speaking professionally? Are you, naturally we will say like or but is it like every 2 seconds that you're, not talking as professionally as you could? So there's that. Also how you work through the questions. So say if they ask you a question and then if it's normal to maybe not have prepared for everything, but like, do you just freeze, or do you, carry yourself with a bit of elegance and just say, give me a second to think about that. So definitely how you communicate and how you carry yourself. Yeah. And with your answers as well, there's only so much that you can prepare. Yeah. I know that when I was preparing for internship, I would be like, what questions do they ask? And everyone would just feel like they ask the standard questions. And it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
what are the
exactly.
standard questions? But it's true, you do get asked standard questions. Yeah. So like with interviews, there's generally, like your icebreaker questions. So tell us about yourself. This is a great chance to make yourself stand out. You can say that, like, I'm a fourth-year pharmacy student, blah, blah, blah. But you can also mention your passions in there, just saying something that is unique to you. Yeah, definitely. And normally after your icebreaker questions, you've got your resume-based questions. So they might ask, like, you've done like this role, tell us about it, or whatever. They have skills-based questions. So like self-awareness. This might be, tell us about your strengths and weaknesses, or tell us about a time that you had to deal with X, Y, Z. They've got your behavior questions. So this is where you might use, like the STAR method. Yeah. So yeah, and then they can often have like hypothetical questions as well. Like, if this happened, what would you do? So they also can tell if you're prepared or not. So just making sure that you're really well prepared, and just like the sections that I mentioned, and going through those, Googling questions, like it generally is general, like standard questions that they get asked you. Obviously for hospital pharmacy, there's also the clinical questions. Yes. So yeah, really communicating well, carrying yourself well, showing that you're prepared. And then the basics as well, just make sure you're in a quiet room and make sure you have good internet connection. Make sure that you're dressed well. Yeah. Basics are really important too. So I would say that for an interview face-to-face. For like the online pre-recorded questions, interviews, those can be a bit difficult because it's not like you're actually being interviewed with someone live. Generally, that's more like a pre-screening tool. I know that all the hospitals do that now, because they want to see, should we even offer you an interview face-to-face. Definitely. The same things apply, really just making sure that you communicate well. Yeah, great.
And I even like the hints and wisdom that you also shared about, or the pearls of wisdom that you shared about, even the techniques you used and kind of having like various structures for different types of questions, like the STAR method for like behavioral types of questions, because that does lead us into our next question perfectly. Are there any other specific techniques that you use to help prepare? You mentioned Googling questions as well. I've heard of people even using ChatGPT. So any
Oh yeah,
advice like that?
back in my day, we didn't have ChatGPT, so Google, just asking interns and pharmacists. So techniques and methods. So what I did, so first of all, you know how I said it, all those sections like icebreakers,
Yeah.
hypothetical questions, clinical questions. Well, clinical I couldn't really guess much, but
Yes.
self-awareness type questions. I tried to come up with as many questions as I could for each one, and then just draft a response.
Great.
Because most of the time, like I said, they do ask you the same questions. Not only just coming up with answers, but I actually practice them out loud, because sometimes you might think, oh, I'm speaking clearly, or I've explained this well. But when someone else is hearing you, or if you don't have someone to, practice with, I remember I would just get my sister and be like, okay, listen to me.
Yeah.
How do I do it? You know, just record yourself.
Yeah.
And see how you sound. Are you speaking clearly? Are you making sense? Are you rambling? Because I tend to speak really quickly. Sometimes I can ramble. So that's something I tried to work on. Another thing that I did was I made a tell and no list. So I made a list of, because coming up with an answer for a specific question is doable, but sometimes in an interview, if they're we don't know what questions they're going to ask.
Yes.
It can trip you up if they're asking something different. So I made a tell and no list, which pretty much means I wrote a list of things that I want them to know about me. And then that way, whatever question was thrown at me, I know what I want to tell the interviewers about. So I could kind of adapt what I want them to know to whatever question was being asked. Obviously, it depends on the question. If it's like a clinical kind of question or like a hypothetical question, you have to think of it on the spot. And then I had a no list, things of what I wanted to know from the hospital. So this was things like about like any recent projects they had, or how they would say like assess interns. It was just anything that I was interested in them. So I did that. What else did I do? The STAR method, which I already mentioned.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's your what the situation is, what the task was, what the action was, and then what the result was. So this is normally used for like behavioral type of questions, like tell us the time about where there was like an angry patient, and how did you deal with it, something like that. So really just getting comfortable with that, I would say, with that, using that method. Yeah, those are the main techniques I use.
Yeah, and they sound like obviously they were effective. And they sound like they're quite as well, quite easy to do, quite simple tasks as well. And they really help you kind of prepare well for these interviews. So personally, I think I'll definitely be employing some of those strategies for my practice. Our next question is, you've kind of touched on it, I guess, like clinical knowledge, because hospitals usually will kind of ask about clinical questions in the interview. How can we prepare for that, or should we prepare for that, or do you have any advice about that kind of section of the interview?
Yeah, honestly, when I was a student, I did not know how to prepare for that, because you don't know what they'll ask. Like, it's not like a standard thing where, they're all going to ask about this or that. So I didn't really prepare for that, because I wasn't going to like read AMH or ECG. I didn't know how to prepare for it. But I just want to reassure, your listeners, that the questions that they're asking, the clinical questions, they know that you're recent graduates. They know what, you would have already experienced. So they're not trying to make things too complicated or too tricky. It's stuff that you should know or should have already experienced in uni, whether it's like through your OSCEs or through your units. So they're not trying to ask anything too difficult. So you will know the answer because you've already done it in uni. So honestly, there's not really a particular way to prepare for it, because you've been preparing for it for the past 4 years through your degree. But yeah, like I said, they know that you're graduates. You're not expected to know everything, but it's also how you go about answering the question, making sure you don't make something up. Because you'll be like,
they'll know.
They'll know. So just make sure you don't make anything up. But again, to just reassure everyone, they'll know that you're recent graduates, so not expected to know everything.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I know it's a lot of it kind of is. I mean, personally, it's something that I worry about, and I know a lot of my colleagues do as well. Just what are we going to get asked? Like, should we prepare for it? But it's kind of reassuring that, like, yeah, they understand, like, that we might not have the answer to everything. And that leads us to another question as well, is if you don't know the specific answer to a question, whether it be a clinical question or a non-clinical question, do you have any advice on how to go about this?
Yeah, so this happens to everyone.
Yeah.
Like, again, some people might not have that much interview experience, or yeah, it happens to the best of us.
Mm-hmm.
And again, then the interviewers know that you're nervous. They know that this is a big deal, so we're all human. Now, it depends on the type of question being asked. In general, what you can say is, like, I've done this before. Like, I've been asked a question and I've just said, oh, that's actually a really good question. Can I have more time to think about it? And then I've literally just like thought about it for a couple of seconds, not like frantically panicking, just make sure you're comfortable in the silence. And most of the time they're fine with that. Another thing you could generally maybe try say is, can we circle back to that question? It's a bit bold, but it's worth asking. Obviously, it depends on the question that's being asked, because sometimes you either know it or you don't know it.
Yes.
Yeah, so it kind of varies, but those two things you can get away with saying, especially if you just ask for a few seconds to think about the question. Like, it's okay. Like I was saying, so dependent on the specific question that's being asked, so clinical questions, if they're asking about like heart failure, for example, and whatever the clinical case is that they've given you, you don't know exactly how to go about it, you can say, like, you can genuinely, especially for clinical questions, you can genuinely say, look, can't recall like the exact like medications or the process or whatever it is they're asking, and then go on to say information that you do know. Say, for example, that but they use like furosemide in heart failure patients. Obviously, granted that it's relevant to the question they're asking. Just mention what you do know. And then mention that, patient safety, just highlight patient safety is very important. So in this case, if it were to happen in real life, I would make sure that I check my references, like mention references like AMH, ETG, so that shows that, okay, you can work independently and you're not just going to do whatever, because the trial, like, what would you do in real life practice? You wouldn't say anything, you would check your references. You could say, if you work at that hospital already, you could, say, I would ask like one of the team leads, because I know, they're so friendly, like during my placement, everyone was so, just really buttering them up. Highlighting, you would ask the team leads, or you'd ask like a more senior pharmacist, or you'd ask like your mentor. And also, normally they like assign a mentor, you can ask them. And you could also go on to say, maybe, this is I know that I maybe just admitting, I know that I don't know about it that much, but I would in the future then make sure to include it in like my CPD plan, so I can learn more about it. So really, you can always still give an answer and say something and showcase some skills that you have, even if you don't know the answer. So like, if you were to say all these things and they've asked about whatever clinical question, yes, you may not, because you don't know the answer, you haven't said that, but you've shown what you do know. You've shown that you value patient safety. You've shown that you know about your references and where to look. You've shown that you already have rapport with the hospital, and that's another reason you want to work there. And then you've also shown that you value, career development. In your CPD, you're trying to improve yourself. So it's still a chance to show your skills and show why you're a good fit for that hospital. So don't freak out. So for clinical questions, that's how I would go about it. Often, like, they ask about situation-based questions. Especially, I mean, this isn't applicable to intern positions, but like for more senior roles, like in my grade 2 interview, like I was asked a question and I just didn't have experience with that situation yet. So if that happens to anyone in the intern interview, you can try saying, can I have a moment to think about it? But I wouldn't recommend like making something up, because that's like, again, they'll see through it. But you could always just say like, okay, I haven't had experience with like this kind of situation, but just to say, if this were to happen, I might go about it this way and do that. So just being honest, saying like, if I haven't had experience, I would try this. So still giving an answer, which shows that, yeah, you don't have experience, but you know how to still navigate that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all really great points. And I love, like, even when you were talking about the clinical questions, like mentioning things like patient safety, showing that you have rapport with the team, and even like talking about CPD, like there's some really great ideas in
Yeah,
there. Yeah, that I don't think that us as students wouldn't have even thought of. So thank you so much for sharing that advice.
it's
It's,
okay because
yeah,
these are
really
not
cool.
just looking at like your actual like answers as
Yeah.
well. Because if you don't know an answer to a question, they're also looking at how do you manage being in a situation where like, oh, you don't know. That
Yes,
relates to like how
exactly.
you carry yourself, your communication skills, and how do you problem solve. If you again, if you don't know the answer, how do you go about it?
Yeah,
So they're
definitely.
also looking at that. It's not just like don't be disheartened if you don't know the answer to a question.
Yeah.
It's still an opportunity to show your skills and showcase why you'd be a good fit for them.
Yeah, no, that's a definitely great way to think about it for sure when approaching those kinds of questions. So, for our final question for this episode, it's about the end of an interview. Do you have any suggestions of what questions we should be asking employers or any kind of things to think about?
Yeah, so first of all, make sure you ask questions because
Yes.
this is like we are talking about interest and like passion before.
Mm,
This is a great chance to show why you're interested in that specific hospital and why you want why you should be an intern for them,
yes.
why they need you. So I remember for my interview, my internship interview, I looked at again, I was a bit extra. I looked at things that were happening in the pharmacy department. So like
Yeah.
I just looked at like the website, like the Northern website,
Yes.
what projects are going on. And I remember they had a like the pharmacist partnered medication charting like
Ah,
program, like
yeah.
PPMC.
Yes.
So that was something we were implementing. So I remember I asked them about that. I said, oh,
Mm,
like this program, is that something that interns might be involved in or like newly registered pharmacists and like how's it going
yeah.
in the department? And it's it just again it shows your interest in them. It shows that
Yes.
you went the extra mile. It shows that that you want to develop a career at that hospital because
Yeah.
they want someone that would ideally be with them for a while.
Hmm.
So yeah, really doing like in-depth research about the hospital because not every intern is going to ask about like a
Yeah.
specific project or whatever's happening. You can ask about general things like, for example, how is the feedback process
Hmm.
or how like are there any, maybe you can ask about like are there any research opportunities outside
Yeah.
of like how Monash has like the ISP program. You can ask if
Hmm.
there's any opportunities outside of that. Um, you can also ask questions relevant to your interests.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
say if you want to ask about like working groups. So again, I know you're interested in sustainability. So if
Yeah.
you're in an interview, you could be like, I don't know, say I saw like your hospital is doing X, Y, Z for
Hmm.
sustainability. That's a really, really big passion of mine. Would interns be able to be involved in that?
Yeah, great.
So yeah, any question that showcases you want to work at that specific hospital, which I feel like I've said it a few times now, but yeah, because everyone wants a hospital position, but you want to
Yes.
show again why you want to work for them, what makes that hospital desirable for you, why you want to be there. So yeah, that's the tips I would give for questions to ask at the end of an interview.
Yeah, no, I really love what you said. Even about kind of like, yeah, relating it back to your passions ultimately. Like, for example, I am interested in sustainability, so asking about any working groups, it's definitely a great way to end the interview. Thank you so much, Anum, for this discussion today. I know
No,
I've
thank
learned a lot
you.
from speaking with you, so I'm guarantee that all of our viewers and listeners have as well. And I'm sure they'll really appreciate all the advice and guidance you've provided us today. Some really unique hints of wisdom, which I think will be really useful for our future internship applications. So we're so grateful that we could speak with you today.
Oh, no, thank you
Yeah.
for having me. I really hope, if I've said like even like one thing and it
Oh, so many.
helped out one of the students because I know exactly how I was feeling like
Yeah.
4 years ago. So yeah, I really hope that one thing that I've said resonates with your listeners and this really helps them because it's just such a stressful period. Like you think like this is the be all or end all of everything, like your whole
Yeah.
career depends on this. But yeah, I also just want to mention even like not being pessimistic, but even say for whatever reason, like if you don't get a hospital position, because there are limited spots,
Yeah.
it's okay. It's truly not the end. Like I know so many pharmacists where they do internship elsewhere, but then they, their passion is hospital pharmacy and they end up in hospital pharmacy. So just to take that stress off of yourself, you can do the best you can do, but just keeping that in mind, it's not the end of everything.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you so much. And I also just wanted to say all the best to everyone, all of our viewers and listeners who are applying for internships
Yes,
this
all
year and
the
the near
best.
future. I hope this episode helped you all. And it definitely helped me. So yeah, thank you so much. And once again, and we can't wait to see even all the incredible things you go on to achieve in your pharmacy career. So have a great day and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Talia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Dose of Pharma acknowledges the traditional custodians of the various lands throughout Australia on which we connect today and pays respect to elders past, present, and future.